the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity. I'm super excited to have a really great conversation. So what I'd like to focus on today, I know that we're in a sustainability seminar. I am tried and true a resilience side of the coin. So resilience and sustainability obviously both focus on joint survivability of systems. But while sustainability is about resource efficiency and making sure that we're not impacting, our natural environment in damaging ways, the resilience is really the other side of the coin, right? Like how our built systems or our communities are responding and adapting and withstanding future conditions or climate change related hazards, environmental risks. I thought it would be nice, I thought it'd be fun and appropriate for this conversation to focus on how our work as a resilience practitioner makes it into the design and delivery process. I think that something that is kind of ironic is that resilience, if you learn about resilience science or, the concept of resilience, it's really this planner Jax called it a blurry boundary object. It's basically like a lens that people can apply to projects. So there's a lot of different definitions of it and things like that. But because of that, we've siloed this subject matter expertise, particularly in the AEC field, into you are the climate person, or you're the climate resilience officer, or the resilience planner in my case. And it really flies in the face of the idea of resilience, the systems thinking that is required. So I want to focus on how we can basically de-silo our work, how we are bringing resilience into the planning process, how we're bringing it into the design process. And candidly, I think that there's still a lot of work to do. So if you're, graduating, I think that would be something that would benefit our industry, is if we really unlocked how to break into these business as usual, structures and processes. So, but I'm very grateful to be here. Right. So the theme today is intervening in business as usual. So preaching to the choir, why resilience, why sustainable design? Well, the future demands it. Our assets, the things that we work on, are built to withstand, not only are they designed and constructed in a way that, they maintain a service life of 50 to 75 to 100 years. But obviously, as we can see in the US context, we really rely on our infrastructure systems to extend well beyond their service life. So the future is really counting on us to be able to design with robustness and redundancy and the flexibility to allow our systems to really, last and be durable. And ironically, actually, I think tomorrow, October 22nd is World Architecture Day. And the theme this year is designing for strength. So very on brand. So, hot take, clients want it. I think that they don't know what they want sometimes. And I think that, resilience and sustainable design is out of the typical vernacular. So, I mean, I think that's changing culturally, but so there's typically a learning curve. But what I've found, and Tom here is on my team too, is once we are doing, a resilience assessment as part of a design build project or something like that, usually what ends up happening is that the client at the end of the day is like, they can kind of hang their hat on this like wonderful insight that we've brought to the team. And they might not have even known that that was what they wanted. They had some one line in the RFP, the request for proposals, that says, be climate resilient or or look at your vulnerability or something, something vague. And then you can actually do a lot with that. And then I like to say this too. So government is paying for it. And what I mean by that is that government is paying for natural hazards. Also private business, real estate, insurance, it's a really hitting all markets. There's a bit of a double entendre here because, governments, at least historically, or I should say the US historically with FEMA, have paid for natural disasters because typically the way that resilience is paid for or recovery is paid for is through federal grants. And then government is also paying for it because 80 some percent of the infrastructure work that's done is at the local and municipal level. So we have both governments paying for it because resulting from a disaster, or paying for it if they want to enhance their resilience. So I thought this was pretty shocking. 150 billion. That's the I think it's from I don't have my notes because I'm dumb and can't figure out the way to put the presenter view on, but the kind of the highlight here is that the national fifth, I think it's the US fifth national climate risk assessment or something, estimates that this is the dollar amount of damages that we see. I think this was in 2024. So obviously these, again, preaching to the choir, these disasters are increasing in intensity and frequency and behavior, and really that the outlook here is that it's only, unfortunately getting worse. Anecdotally, I know in New York City, where I sit, we've had the most intense rainfall events, the 4 top most intense rainfall events in the last 5 years. So just even anecdotally, it's not whether or not you believe in climate change, it's more about our lived experience, and that managing environmental risks is a very real, timely, appropriate thing to do to really ensure business continuity and the economic prosperity, let aside all of the way that it adversely affects the communities that we work within. So I talked about a little bit what the difference is between resilience and sustainability. Just terminology wise, I think it's important to say right up front that saying the word resilient design or resilience planning is actually a bit of a shorthand. Communities are resilient, and the interventions that we make in the promotion or to enhance resilience for those communities are what we're referring to as resilient design. We reflect, the terminology of the day. You could just so you know, if you want to, hot tip, if you want to sound like a real pro, resilience and resiliency, that the Y in resiliency is actually a needless variant grammatically. So the proper way to talk about resilience is resilience, not resiliency. But resilience moves us all towards, climate adaptation. It moves us towards a more sustainable development, writ large. And then sustainability obviously is taking a look more at the reducing our carbon impact. So as Dibs kindly introduced me. I lead the National Resilience Practice at STB. I started it. What that means is that my team does a lot of climate risk assessments. We are right now, and hopefully at the end I can talk about it a little bit, but right now we're focused on ways to unlock innovative financing and capitalize on insurance, like cost savings and insurance as a result of resilience improvements. So we're really talking about ways um, to respond to some of the, the federal priority shifts in the last year, and find and secure more sustainable ways to finance our resilience projects. So that's really what we're up to. But we do all sorts of things. We do Envision related projects. I think that was on the roster for what you're talking about in the series. We work very, very closely with the Ooh, I'm being invited to join a room. I think I'm gonna not now.
Yeah,
Um,
don't worry about it. Parisa, like again, sent it early.
oh, okay, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Parisa, I know. Yeah, you're doing this for the first time. So, but I was gonna say that we work really, I think it's important to say too that our resilience team works very closely with the economics team, because really what the trends here in resilience science are really moving towards, instead of quantifying your losses in terms of avoided damages, or like there is a probability that you might hit a disaster, you might have a disaster, you might have certain costs associated with that disaster later in time. We're flipping the script a little bit and we're starting to talk about the value generated by resilience. And by value, I mean both the co-benefits of nature-based solutions, for example, but also the value as it relates to the contribution of resilience projects to the regional economy and business continuity. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, a lot of the climate risk assessments that are done are essentially, enabled by geospatial tools like GIS. So we work very closely with our digital advisory folks as well. Oops, sorry. So what I like to say at STV, and I'm gonna lead us into two different case studies about ways that resilience has been, brought into practice. But I wanted to start first with just like this framing of how we articulate resilience at an AEC firm. STV, if you don't know us, we are a national professional services firm. It's 3,200 people across the US. I think there are 66 offices. The majority of the work that we do is in transportation. I think about 80% of the work, just for a flavor, our top two clients are New York City MTA and Amtrak. But we also have a water practice and buildings. So anyway, we are across the US. We're located in the communities that, that are doing this work. So the way that the resilience practice has been organized, so we think about resilience, we call it resilience big R and resilience little r. So resilience big R is referring to all of the processes, the procedures, the climate risk assessments, the planning, kind of the way that governance or resilience plays a role in governance, or the intersection of planning and emergency management, like all that just kind of umbrella goes into resilience big R, which is my team. Then we have resilience little r, which is all of our structural engineers. So that's outcomes oriented resilience, meaning all of the flood resilient design, increasing different redundancies for your power reliability. That all fits into the bucket of little r resilience. Whoops. And I also think we shouldn't be shy about the fact that some people don't know what we mean when we talk about resilience. Like, I think that's changed a lot in the last maybe 5 years, but it's a relatively newer concept. We can really point to back in the 90s when the UN had this declaration of the International Decade of Natural Disaster Reduction, where they said, wow, all of our natural disasters are costing too much and are creating a crazy amount of damages. And then they really got after it in 1999 when they said, it's not only about the damages and the price tag of the damages after natural disasters. We are actually starting to layer in what the social impacts are. And so that's when we really bring into focus resilience. It's when there's not only, it's kind of that triple bottom line situation. Like we're not only looking at it through the lens of disaster risk in the like pedantic kind of the cost it is for a natural disaster, but also how it extends to people's livelihood, their public health in general, their quality of life. And then, of course, in 2014, when this was the first year that ISO created a standard related to resilience indicators. And in transportation, for example, the indicators had to do with business reliability, how many trains were running on time, and access to evacuation routes. So we really started to, as an industry, start to wrap our heads around like, okay, we are saying we want to be resilient. We know that climate is adversely affecting our population, but like, how are we actually starting to measure that? Or what do we mean by being resilient? So really that's, in the last 10 years. And then, yeah, so maybe I'll just go on. And one last piece about this resilience at multi-scale. So I think that 100 Resilient Cities, a couple years, or well, I guess now it's been 5 or 6, or I think they sunset in 2019 and broke off into 2 other groups, Resilient Cities Catalyst and another one. But they did a really nice job, I thought, about answering what makes infrastructure resilient by describing the qualities of the system. So if you're looking at a utility, say distribution of water, does it hold these characteristics? And that was kind of a good way to take more of a like a less linear approach at describing a system of systems. So, and it really kind of brings into focus too, like how resilience, if you're enhancing your community's resilience, you can do that through the built interventions that you make, the policies that you pass, the types of advanced warning systems you have in place so that people are out of harm's way, the different emergency management or operational resilience measures you might have, like you're sending out a particular workforce to respond to a certain situation. So there are a lot of different, I'd like to say that there are a lot of different levers to pull to enhance your resilience. So I just want to impress upon you. So as we kind of go back to the theme of today of how can we bring this into practice, we really start to appreciate that how in the heck are we going to bring all these different levers and scales and definitions and, of a relatively new, field of practice into design and construction that has been around, since the industrial age. So that's really where we are now. So, I didn't realize this was automated so nicely. That is not a slide I made. So, I like to define when people say, say the definition of resilience. I can get all tongue-tied about the ability to anticipate, prepare for, adapt to changing conditions, to respond, blah, 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 and I can ramble off this definition. But I think what's stuck better for me is thinking about a system, whatever your subject system is, the capacities of that system. So it kind of it harkens back to the qualities of resilient systems. But if your system has a resistive capacity, an adaptive capacity, or a restorative capacity, like really those are the types of attributes of a system that tell you that it is enabling resilient communities. So I have about 25 more minutes, I believe. So I'm going to share with you now an example of a resilience assessment, example of intervening in resilient design, and then just share a little bit about my thinking about where we're headed. I will say I want to, I'm going to more or less scrub the clients out of the talk, but these are real projects, and obviously you can probably figure out which ones they are. So anyway, so my team just performed a very large climate risk assessment for a transportation client in New York City, for all of the bridges, tunnels, and a site downtown. So we've also performed, this one I can definitely share, and this is a fun one. We did the resilience assessment for Little Island. So I think you can look across the river and see that. So that was kind of a different one because we performed it at the end of construction, which is kind of it has a particular nuance too. You have less levers to pull if the infrastructure is already built. But ideally, sorry, I'm getting frozen here. Um, ideally, you have a client that wants to look at their risk at an enterprise level. I think that is one of the key ingredients for success. A lot of times, in reality, what happens is it's very squeaky wheel gets the grease sort of situation. So if you have something in dire need of replacement, they might incrementally be building in resilience through design criteria, or maybe a planning exercise for a particular area. But what's best is obviously if you're looking at your entire system. So in the case of the New York City client, this was so awesome. Like after Hurricane Ida and Henri, they got the funding to do an assessment of climate risk across all of their assets. We were in charge of particular facilities, and essentially what it looks like is we were delivered the asset management data. And what that means is a glorified Excel spreadsheet of 50,000 assets. We were then given all of the plans for all the different sites, and we performed hazard modeling. In this case, it was coastal storm surge, sea level rise, stormwater modeling, and an extreme heat. We did an assessment for extreme heat. And through talking with the stakeholders, we were able to cull that list of assets for what was critical. Because if we think back to the definition of resilience, it's all about capacities, but depending on the function of your asset, you might say to yourself, it's not important for that thing to run during a storm. But like in the case of a tunnel, you need to have a fan plant, for example, online so that it can be pushing air through the tunnel so you don't have the people in the tunnel get carbon monoxide poisoning or unsafe conditions, or not be able to respond to any sort of fires. So first we did the exercise of like culling through the data, working with the stakeholders internally to truly understand what was critical and how these systems connected. And then concurrently we did hazard modeling. So with those two pieces of information, if you overlay them, you can then see through benefit cost ratios and different, you can toggle on and off the different planning horizons to see what your specific climate risk is at a critical node, we call them nodes, through time. And that enables the decision maker to really understand what is priority, what is an acceptable level of risk that they're willing to take on, at what point, if their capital planning cycle is a 10-year cycle, like if they need to start thinking about flood risk in 2030, they better have that project in the capital plan now because, otherwise 10 years from now, we will have passed the window where the risk will, well, quite frankly, the risk will be worse. And so, or the exposure will be worse. And so therefore, it would have some compounding effects there. And then what we did once we figured out where those critical nodes were, we then were able to work with our structural engineers, our little R people, and develop the mitigation measures that might be appropriate to solve for those things. And so that process, was ideal. It gave you a very high level, enterprise level risk evaluation so that you could make very targeted, data informed decisions that rolled into your capital planning, or in this case, also they used the information to, as they're actually updating their asset management system. So there was some efficiencies there. They were able to make recommendations for different emergency planning things. There was a lot of offshoots that you could use with that data. So, so climate risk assessments, that is resilience planning, a lot of times looks like this. It's a geospatial analysis. It's identifying critical areas or vulnerable areas, and then doing your best through a multi-criterion decision making to prioritize where you should spend your money. Cool. So that is resilience planning. So then, so when it's not a planning exercise, like a classical or traditional planning exercise, a lot of times what our team is engaged in is, STV does design. In this case, I forgot to take the project name, whatever. So the project is the Glassboro-Camden line. It's a light rail. You probably know it. Between Camden and Gloucester County in New Jersey. The idea there is that they want to restore passenger service along a partly existing 18-mile rail line. And we were brought in to do the bridging documents, that is the preliminary engineering from 0 to 30%, to ultimately prepare those, what they call bridging documents, so that they can, bring a contractor on board to design, and in this case, also operate and maintain. It's called DBOM procurement. I don't know that they've actually decided on that for sure, but that was the intent when we were working on the bridging documents. So in this case, they arguably didn't have any sort of climate risk assessment early on, but they knew that their line was in an estuary zone, in a subject. Lots of the line was subject to flooding. They knew they wanted to do something about flooding and extreme heat. So we ran essentially a climate risk assessment concurrent to the design, and used the approach of working with the designers to make sure that the mitigation strategies were being rolled into the preliminary engineering as they designed. So it was kind of like resilience advisors, if you will. And why, of course, this was important is on rail, our climate can reap all sorts of issues. So for heat, you probably experienced this summer, some outages on service if you're riding any lines. In the most extreme case, we can see buckling, like the picture here on the left. Heat has adverse effects on signaling, and then of course power is a foundational system, and so with heat we oftentimes see disruption in power. Then I alluded to it in this case too, that our rising sea level and extreme precipitation really was of concern for the rail line. This is pretty classic. I feel like right now, New York City MTA, for example, well, New Jersey Transit for that matter, everyone is very concerned about the impacts of flooding on rail. So So that's why we were doing it. So the objectives of our climate risk assessment that was running concurrent to the design was to minimize the disruption to service, to minimize the restoration cost and time, and then also minimize the impacts to, the future revenue for the line. Because obviously, if you're not running trains because of a damage, you're not collecting fares, and that hits the bottom line of the agency. So I'll just cut to the, they say the TLDR is that, what we ended up doing again was this geospatial mapping, and we defined what's called the design flood elevation. That is like the level that they wanted to design their equipment, their critical equipment to. They had limitations about how they could change the elevation of the tracks in the station, but there is still a lot of levers that you can pull to make your system more resilient. So in this case, for what they called technical provisions, which is telling the contractor what to do about these risks, we were sharing the design flood elevation along the different segments of the line, and giving the contractor, or in this case, they're called a concessionaire because they have the operation and maintenance of the line, different alternatives that they could use to flood proof their different systems. Heat is a little bit more nuanced. There's actually quite a bit of the data that we got for this heat assessment came out of Rutgers. But we were looking at as not only as temperatures increase, but as the duration of heat waves, as those get longer, what would be the detrimental effects to the line. So we basically gave the concessionaire or the contractor the information about what they should expect, and said, you should expect that trains will be running on your line under these conditions in the future, and that they should design accordingly. But we also complemented that technical provision with research, like a best practices manual, because a lot of there's actually quite a bit of research in extreme heat and rail coming out of Europe. And oftentimes, there are things you can do in terms of, well, of course, on the stations, you can, include shading or passive ventilation and things like that. But for the rail, a lot of times the way you can mitigate your heat risk is through construction means and methods. So the way that the contractor would actually be installing the rails. I'm not a rail, this is not my area, but for anybody who's interested, it's all about adjusting the rail neutral temperature during installation. So I actually saw a lot of promise for, I felt like GCL was a great example of us actually being able to influence the design, even though the horse was out of the gate, out of the stables a little bit, because there was some iteration that we were able to do with the engineers that were doing the preliminary design. And since we were only bringing the design to 30%, we could basically communicate to the contractor how we wanted the system to perform under different conditions. And we did our best to give them lots of ideas of how to have it perform that way, but it wasn't as prescriptive as, say, a design bid build procurement, where we would have had to have already dialed in exactly how to do that. So yeah, I would just say that in this case, the project delivery method and performance-based delivery was a great way to integrate resilience improvements. With design bid build, I don't know if this is well, we can talk about it during the Q&A, but the design, design, build, of course, like, you in the blue box here, this would be like a client does a climate risk assessment. The owner then, gets the climate risk assessment, reads it, and says, okay, we want to prioritize these projects and we want to, write an RFP for this project. The designer then designs that project specifically to what the owner, scopes, and then the contractor builds what the designer scopes. But the problem here with design bid build for resilience is that the onus is really on the owner to translate the information in the climate risk assessment to the designer. And the designers aren't really given the opportunity to iterate on ways, they're back to this theme of levers, like they are they're answering the mail as far as like what they're allowed to do. So I think that they're where on the other hand, with this design bid build or design build in general, there's more of a feedback loop between the engineers and the resilience subject matter expertise, where you can continue to iterate as the design advances. Now, yeah, and then another thing, obviously, that was great about this too is that not only were we able to provide those technical provisions and the climate risk assessment, but there was also this best practices that were able to be, communicated as well. So I think we learned a lot in that process. There's, I'll just impress upon everyone that you can enhance your resilience through many different ways. And so because of that, there's no one size fits all. Resilience is really one in the eye of the beholder. It's what the owner wants. It's their particular resilience related goals. And then it's also subject to the unique context, like what constraints they were working with. In the case of GCL, it's that the line is there, like the line is located in a floodplain. What are the different things that we can do about it? So I didn't really talk about functional recovery, but I think I might just let that aside. So yeah, so let me just actually let me stop sharing for a second. So on the, like in the insights category, best case, like I said, the client is doing enterprise risk assessment all at the same time. Most often clients are making incremental change, which is great, but it's incremental. And of course, another piece of the pie is, we all have to be conscious, I think, as resilience practitioners of how the project will be delivered, like the contracting methods, because there's pluses and minuses for every different delivery method. And I wanted to just impress upon you that, in my view, I started this conversation with this in mind. So, we really want to work against siloing this kind of information. We want to democratize climate related information. We talk a lot about upskilling and retooling the engineers and planners around us. Like, someone at a conference I went to, which I was like, I don't know if I believe that, but, it was like, I want to work myself out of a job. Like, I want to teach the people around me to be incorporating environmental risks into their project. But the reality is that, we're competing against some existing cultural and procedural constraints. And then we oftentimes, when we're responding, we as consultants are responding to RFPs, there is to some extent certainly more than to some extent, the full extent is to stick to the scope. And but oftentimes sticking to the scope will leave us with static reports that are not necessarily actionable and not necessarily timed with other things that are going on in the agency, like different, like the capital planning cycle or the underwriting cycle for insurance. Like, how is enterprise risk management information being communicated to the underwriters? We're also competing with what I wanted to land on, though, and I before we move into the Q&A, is more of a message of hope. I will say that in my last 6 years, well, excuse me, I mean, I basically started working in resilience. I was more in environmental engineering before, which is obviously adjacent, but in 2017 with, so I really haven't, in the grand scheme of things, so 8 years of experience, the amount of maturity and evolution and, rapid evolution and I'd say like the maturity curve of the way that we assess these projects is insane. Like the minds that are thinking about these problems right now are incredible. And there's some really beautiful bright spots and great things. I mean, right there in New Jersey with all of the resilience parks, all the rebuild by design, the nature-based solutions and some real bright spots. And then also, I think that, if you were able to attend, and I highly recommend anyone who's interested in these topics to go to the New York City Climate Week. A lot of the programs are free. We just had Climate Week at the end of September. And it's just very interesting to me, too, that the themes this year that really emerged was around funding and finance and the leveraging the insurance sector in this conversation. And that also like private development is really starting to appreciate the need for, for climate risk assessment. I mean, as an example, California, if you are a business in California doing a certain amount of revenue, I think it's like 50 million across the states, then you're subject to a policy now where you have to report on your climate risk, like a financial disclosure of climate risk, like TCFD. And so I really think that it's really starting to signal a cultural shift. And I'm super excited about it. I mean, I love this stuff. So I hope you all, yeah. So I guess that's it. I would love to take any questions, or I know there's breakout room, right?
Yeah,